Welcome to Scale Sessions, the podcast that helps revenue leaders like you boost sales and revenue to achieve business growth within the trenches insights.
We can skip the fluff and focus on real-world strategies you can use right away.
Each episode brings you actionable takeaways from sales and revenue leaders navigating growth challenges like you. Let's dive into today's session and scale up your success. Welcome everyone to our panel discussion on feedback and mentorship, every leader's secret to scaling success. I'm Nicola. So I've had the privilege over the last 3 months of speaking to some incredible female revenue leaders. And a recurring topic that comes up every time we talk about their career journeys is the value of feedback and mentorship. And I really wanted to dig in a little bit deeper to this. So I am delighted to have 3 amazing panelists with us today, 2 of which have already been on the podcast, and 1 I believe is going to be scheduled to join us soon, I hope, Hannah. But before we get started, I just wanted to ask all of you, how many of you have a mentor at the moment? Okay, so about 4 or 5. And how many of you have had one in the past? Okay, so the majority of you, about 80%. Okay, that's really helpful to know. Thank you. So let's go over to our panelists first for some quick introductions. Hannah, let's start with you.
Great. Hannah Ajikawo, a CEO and founder of Revenue Funnel. So started a go-to-market consulting firm just about 2 years ago on International Women's Day. Actually, yes, it's 2 years very soon. Just helping B2B tech and scale-ups figure out go-to-market in a more simplified way. So love what I'm doing. Been in sales for 17 years, done every single role that you can think of, even the made-up ones that happen at startups. And it's like Revenue Funnel is just a culmination of all those learnings in very interesting environments. So happy to chat about mentorship and feedback today.
Fantastic. And Penny?
Hi, I'm Penny Orme. I have been working in sales in some way, shape or form for about 30 years, showing my age a bit. I was more recently in a chief customer and revenue officer role, but have moved the first time out of 30 years out of full-time into advisory. So I work with execs and boards and coaching in sales leadership and revenue advisory. So I'm working at the moment with Revintis, and I have my own business as well. And I'm just about to launch a book, co-authoring a book with 2 other women called The Female Sales Leader with Medic. And that launches next week.
Thanks, Penny. And Aly?
Hi, Aly Read. I am Chief Commercial Officer at Seed Legal. So we help startups and scale-ups basically raise investment from angels, VCs, and then help them on their scale-up journey through option schemes, hiring, employment, R&D tax credits, you name it. We do it. My experience in sales has been for the last kind of 11 years now. I was at peer-to-peer lender funding circle for 7.5 years, where I managed a variety of different size sales teams from kind of 10 up to 60 plus. And then I've been at Seed Legals for 3 years and took on the wider commercial remit a year or so ago. So that's sales, marketing, growth, partnerships, international expansion.
Thank you. Right, let's get started. So, question number 1. What's been the best piece of feedback you've had in your career? Because for me, I remember about 12 years ago, I was told quite brutally, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, Nicola. Can you stop fixing and start listening? And actually, that set me on a whole coaching journey, which I never would have started if I hadn't had that feedback then. What about you, Hannah? What's been yours?
I've been quite a bit, but now just on the spot, just thinking about it, it was probably the first time, this is like 2009 times, the national sales director said to me, I need to talk to you. And I was like, you know that, come to my office type thing, right? So I went upstairs and she was like, I think you're better than your manager. And I was like, what? So she was like, just think about leadership. And I was like, no, I just want to be like a super rep forever. But I didn't take it on board at all for a very long time. But that almost planted a seed for me that, actually, I'm quite good at this whole sales thing. And me doing things in my own way is actually accepted in some spaces. So that was quite a big deal. And it just came to my head right now, actually.
That's a great one. Oh, and you think it's going to be really negative feedback because of what she said, and then, wow, you're better than your manager.
She was scary. She still is, actually. I spoke to her recently. I was like, you still scare me? Like I'm a little kid again. Yeah.
Thanks for the feedback you gave me. What about you, Penny?
Well, actually, the one you mentioned resonated with me because I have a tendency to talk a lot, which kind of feeds into when I went from a individual contributor into my first leadership role. No one often really trains you how to be a manager when you're a salesperson. And actually, it's my swan song is I think we should be investing way more in our sales leaders and training them because actually you can level up your team. as much as 25-30% in doing that. But when I was lucky in my first role to have some form of management training, and it's kind of feedback in a way. So there was something called Insights, where I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's the yellow, blue, green brain side, which, by the way, I didn't know can change over time. That once you get it, you have it years later. I didn't realize. So anyway, I was red, yellow, surprise, surprise, as a salesperson. So big thinker, lots of communication, very emotive, working with operations, who my counterpart and peer who I'd struggled to communicate with and work with was very green, blue, who was very process, wanted things in advance. As we did this training and I went into management, he was my buddy. And his feedback to me was, I was like, we had this another contentious situation once a week. We'd meet up and discuss how we were doing. And he just said, just one day, Penny, can you just turn up and give me it in a structured way before you come to the meeting, give me the prep, what we're going to talk about, and in a structured way. And we then follow up the next week. And that was fantastic for me because he's absolutely right. He was absolutely right. And so my big learning was, how do I communicate in a way that isn't about how I want to communicate, it's about how it's being received. And I think I continually have to work on that as a manager and leader. But I think that was really probably vital for me as a
Did
manager.
you put him on an improv course as well and say, right, go and practice thinking on your feet?
Yeah, each week I was like, oh God, what feedback am I going to get this week? No, it's fine.
Aly, what about you?
I just thought of a different one on the spot, like Hannah did. But I always used to get told by one of my old managers, don't take things personally. And that's such a hard piece of feedback to take, especially when you don't think you are taking something at work personally. And so I'd get really frustrated and say, I'm not taking it personally. But obviously with my attitude and my behaviour, it made it seem like it was. So I definitely found that challenging when I was during my time at Funding Circle. I was there 7.5 years. I cared so much about everything that was going on. And then actually one thing that I found really helpful was actually then joining a new company and starting a new role. Actually, a piece of feedback that my boss gave me after a year of working with me was, oh, you're really calm. You're really, really relaxed. Don't take things personally. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Wow. So I was able to, I guess, have a different attitude, I suppose, by changing roles, changing company, and kind of use that as a bit of a leapfrogging board, I suppose. Refresh, exactly.
So I think being a leader, you're often working with lots of different stakeholders. So you've got your board, you've got your leadership team, you've got your peers, you've got your own team, you've got people from different departments. How do you adapt how you give and receive feedback depending on who you're working with? Penny?
I think the principle is the same in that, and I'm kind of skipping forward to now almost stealing the book we're going to talk about later, but it underpins with, I love Radical Candor as a book. I don't know if you read it. I think it's just the principles. Everyone's nodding. It's like kind of the go-to, isn't it? How do you give feedback? It's got to be clear. It's got to be concise, and it's got to be led with empathy, genuine empathy. So I think that underpins whoever you talk to. I think there's different nuances. When I joined the exec team, that was a huge leap for me because I talked about the leap from IC to manager. Actually, manager to second or third line was okay. That didn't feel such a leap. But when I went to the exec team, I had completely underestimated not only how I work with the execs, because you no longer have a manager, right? You are accountable entirely for your own voice and you're a peer, but also you have to manage the board, right? So if you're a CRO, the thing that I had to navigate was, how do I bring a positivity, honesty, but I don't want to spook an investor if my numbers aren't great, right? And there's a balance. And that was an art that I got a coach to help me with, actually, to be candid, because I'm very honest and upfront, and Radical Candor is great and you should do that. But there's being too honest sometimes or too blunt. And so it's creating a story. So it's storytelling, I think, with honesty when I got to the exec level. And that was probably the biggest challenge I had when I became a CRO.
Right. So how you actually share what you need to say as a story versus
so
just here's the facts.
So underpinning is like Radical Candor, I think. But then when I got to that level, I think that was creating a story and balance.
Aly, how about you?
I'm thinking similar to what you said about the personality types and how you speak to different people. Obviously, for sales reps especially, you're constantly thinking about the prospect or the account that you're speaking to and what kind of personality type are they? How am I going to do this pitch to try and resonate with this specific person in the best way? So I'd always tell my team now to treat senior stakeholders especially in the same way that you would treat a sales call. So think about what they care about, think about what matters to them. So if I think about my exec team, and the same way you do for your direct reports as well, you obviously think about their personalities and profiles, and you'd give someone feedback in a very different way than you would potentially another team member. So my exec team now, the CEO is all about customer awesomeness. And so all he cares about is the customer having a great experience, the NPS, the CSAT scores. So obviously if I'm putting together a pitch for a process change, I'm going to go in and think about, okay, well, I'm going to use this angle of why it matters to the customer. Whereas my MD is just about numbers, data, conversion, revenue. And so thinking about the person you're talking to and making sure that you're crafting a story and a narrative that's relevant for that person, and therefore the feedback has to be relevant to what they care about.
They're very similar to the messaging you use when you're going out to your different personas and ICPs. You're doing exactly the same in-house. It's like, right, what is the message that they're going to most resonate with? Hannah, anything you'd like to add?
I think it's interesting because now I report up to myself, or I should say my son, probably. I have to ask him permission to do a lot of things, like to be here. But in general, like when I'm working with the internal team or with different people in, like, we have a little ecosystem of experts that support customers, I try to just identify two things: what motivates them, but also, do they understand the role that they're playing in making a customer or the business successful? I think with those two things pretty clear, it's easy to just take a more direct approach. So we were talking about the SHIT sandwich that no one likes, right?
No, it's coming,
just,
don't you?
yeah, it's like, oh, here, okay, yeah, there we go, yeah. But so I try to just be more direct. So as an example, we had an issue that came up with the person who supports with marketing, and I saw it, and I was like waiting for them to share that they've seen it, hadn't seen it, and it was more a case of, hey, so I understand that he's on a learning journey and he knows that. So we've got this open communication around, I'm going to give you just very direct feedback and I know that you're going to fix it. So my relationship in that situation is, I'm going to identify that there was something that went wrong. I'm going to tell you the impact that had, and then I'm just going to directly tell you what the issue is with that, which is, you didn't come to me first. So what's the plan on fixing that? And it was like, oh my God, I feel so embarrassed. Oh my God, I hate that this happened. And it's like, here's my plan to fix it. But I knew that he would figure out a plan to fix it. So it's a case of, if I was like, hey, so can we catch up later? It's like, about what? It's you create this anxiety.
Yeah,
so I say,
absolutely.
if you can create an environment where you're not going to raise someone's anxiety, the quicker you can just be very direct, but you understand their kind of situation. But I think it just makes it a bit easier. Even though, yeah.
Often it's like, can we have a chat later? That whole like waiting for it is the worst. And that's a really lovely segue actually into my next question, which is, so often leadership teams talk about, oh, it's the value of feedback, it's so important, but they don't create that safe environment where people actually feel they can, particularly for teams when they're wanting to give feedback upwards. And often they feel they can't or they won't because they don't feel that it's safe enough to do that. How do you create that safe, open culture where it is really welcomed at all levels and from all people?
I'm a big believer in, and I do this with prospects as well, I like to share, right? So I let people know that it's okay to share yourself in these environments, because it's like, most people, particularly if there's a kind of like a hierarchy, right, or subordinate, whatever you want to call it, where you are the leader and they may not be as senior as you or relative to you, if you expect them to just show up and start sharing, then it's like they're trying to work out what's okay here. And I was giving the example. So Penny and I used to work together. And I remember when we, many, many moons ago, we had in the interview, I was trying to suss Penny out. Like, how's this going to, I don't know this one. She's like, I'm like, how's this going to work out? But she was so real. And I was like, yes, okay, now I can. But because she shared, I was able to be like, let me keep it real now. But that's what I like to do, right? So if we keep it real, when you share something about your life and your experiences, then they will do that. And then it's safer. It's much safer for them to have conversations that be more direct.
And it's how you respond to that sharing as well, right? So if you're open and then that person comes back and you don't shoot them down, everyone else watches as well, yeah.
Yeah. I think you also need to just say, I think the example I gave before was one of the team members, I just said, hey, my first interaction was, hey, can you tell me everything that we're doing wrong? So they were like, oh, is this a setup? I was like, absolutely not. Tell me, I want you literally to write a report on like the website, LinkedIn, the campaigns, the
really
emails.
Inviting it, and
absolutely.
that's a brilliant thing to do.
And they're like really junior. It's like their first time ever in marketing. And they were like, here? And I was like, yeah, get deeper on this. It's worse than that.
Overkill. What about you, Aly? What do you do at Seed Legals to create that safe environment?
I'm just thinking off the back of what Penny just said there, like actually teaching people how to receive feedback, I think is important as well. So just saying thank you. And a lot of people feel the need to myself definitely included, feel the need to kind of defend or explain what. Yeah, and actually, it's just thank you. Thank you for the feedback and trying to make people see that feedback is power, whether it's constructive or positive, and just getting people comfortable with the idea of feedback generally. My husband's in the room and he will attest that I don't like feedback myself. But yes, it's like, I guess, understanding why it is beneficial. We did something at Sea Legals where the sales team and the CX team couldn't communicate. They couldn't feedback to each other when they were getting frustrated with processes, or the customer experience team were saying that sales were mis-selling, and the sales team was saying that the CX team was saying the wrong thing or being too slow, and they wouldn't give each other the feedback. They would go to their managers would go to managers of the other team, and then it would go back down. And so we did this whole team session about how they can communicate better, and we put them into role plays, and we got them to play the other team. So the CX team would be sales and vice versa, and we gave them some scenarios and said, right, give feedback about kind of the behavior that you've seen, but try to think about it from the other point of view. And it kind of got them thinking about, actually, maybe it's not always kind of a negative view, or it's not done on purpose. And so that was quite a useful exercise. And also just training people on how to give feedback in a constructive way. So using frameworks, whether it's the SBI framework or whatever else that people use, but that was quite helpful.
I think it's so helpful to think about what's important to them, and also sometimes what their baggage might be. I'm doing some fractional work at a company at the moment, and the product team are used to having zero support from marketing, as are the sales. And so we're changing that perception, but they quite often like, well, we're not going to get this. And the marketing team get really upset. It's like, you've got to remember what they've been through before and understand that before you react. And I think what you both said as well is saying thank you after you receive it. It's really helpful.
Can I just add something as well? Something that I picked up as well is, you just reminded me actually, Aly, around clarity. I think the reason why feedback becomes contentious, or it becomes hard inside teams, is because there's often a lack of clarity or understanding about what people's roles and responsibilities are. Like it was so interesting a few years ago when I was working with it was initially the sales team, then I was like account management, then CS. So it was so interesting to work with the whole team. And I just, because they were all like, this person can't do that. And I was like, hold up, do you know what their role is? And do you know what, tell me, what does CS do? And CS were like, what? I said, what did the account man? And they literally didn't know. They were like, they upsell. And I was like, so what do you tell? I was like, so what do you tell customers? And they're like, well, we tell customers, our account managers are responsible for upselling. I was like, oh my gosh, that's why they don't answer the phone. But it was like, it was literally like, it was just clarity. And when we defined it, they were encouraging, supporting calls. So feedback was like, well, now you know what I do, I can receive it. Yeah. Whereas if you don't, I'm not going to be responsive to your feedback. So I'm like, you don't know anything. You don't know.
And I don't value your opinion.
And I don't value
you don't even know what I do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it's small, but really important.
Aly, very much to you. I just want to start talking about mentorship as well. Have you had any mentors in your career that have really changed, had a huge impact on you?
For me, I'll be quite honest about this, probably haven't invested as much into a mentor as I probably should have, as early in my career as I should have done. But I was very fortunate that, especially during my time at Funding Circle, I worked with a variety of amazing different managers who I've kept in touch with, and they've acted in a more of an informal mentorship way, I suppose. And so, yeah, I kind of regularly will reach out, meet up occasionally, and can take any kind of problem to them in a less structured setting. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily one person, but having good relationships with old managers and then being able to go to them, and you feel comfortable because you've obviously worked with those people for such a long period of time, that I still keep in touch with most of them today and still find their feedback really, really valuable.
So advisory board of your old managers.
It's a good point though, because there are different types of mentorship, right? So having informal mentors as well as formal are just as valuable. So I would say that I've had those as well, and then I've had more formal ones through my career. And you're right, I think having those, sometimes I can get it from my family members, right? My extended family can give me advice on things. I think in my career, there's been like mentors, champions, and coaches, right? And they've all had different impacts on me. Later on in my career, champions have probably had the largest, most significant impact. So if I've got internal champions, what I mean by that is someone who's senior, who will be moving me forward in the company. So an example of that would be in SUSE, where I was there, and then I was put forward for the COO role, which I would never have gone for in a million years. But an internal person felt that I could have done that and worked with me to put my name forward for that, and then brought me across to Causeway. So, when we did the research in the book, that became quite clear that where women were promoted and moving forward was when they had a champion. I hate to say it, also male champion, but if they have a male ally and champion, but if you do that, that's when you see the real progression, particularly for women in their careers. So champion for me was big, and I have had mentors as well. I would argue that usually when I'm in a new role or I've been promoted. And so that's when I would bring one in who's in that role and see and could always work with me. And then I've had coaches that are usually paid for. So mentors are usually externally outside of the company. Champions are internal. And then coaches have been external to the company and they're paid for. And usually I'll use them for communications, coaching or whatever. And that's a more formal framework. So that's how I've had. But I say to anyone who hasn't had one or doesn't, get them. But we'll talk about this in a bit, but it's about getting the right person at the right time for the right thing, right? It's not just having a mentor, right?
Been a particular mentor that's had a real impact on your career?
You're going to push, aren't you? Because he's your mate.
No, not at all. I just think it's nice to have examples.
No, Pete Crosby, was very good for me. I work with him now, actually, in his team. So he's now, I work for him as an advisor. But he was a great coach. Coach and mentor, really, for me. And another one was actually a guy called Imran, who was, when I was at SUSE, he was chief customer officer there. And he came to me voluntarily and said, I'd like to mentor you in your chief customer officer role because I'd never done it before. And he was amazing too. Yeah.
What about you?
I had no idea about mentorship ever until I had people reach out to me when I started to create content in 2019.
And they wanted you as a mentor.
Yeah,
and you were like,
I just want to give you some advice if you don't mind. Feedback. I was like, But yeah, it wasn't anything that I ever considered. I didn't have people around me where that was the norm. I was always in roles where it was like, it just wasn't normal. I didn't have friends around me that had mentors. I didn't have a group of people who I grew up with where they were in corporate sales or anything. So it was just me kind of on my lone journey. It was only, and it's crazy because I'm like, that's nuts to think that was an opportunity that I missed out on. But for me, as I started to connect with people through COVID and start to think about this whole consulting work, I just had people reach out. I was like, oh, I love what you're doing. Can I talk? I met with Pete. Pete actually reached out to me and was like, keep seeing your face everywhere. Let's chat. And he was just like, how do you know all this stuff? It was quite funny, but Pete was my old boss's boss. So they're just like, Pete's everywhere, by the way. Get to know Pete Crosby. He's amazing. But so yeah, that happened. And then now I actually have a mentor. I met someone at an event and I was like, I like you. Can you mentor me? And he probably thought I wouldn't message him back. But the next day I was like, hi. As I said yesterday. Yeah, remember me. But we be meeting up every week.
And what value is he providing for you?
Yeah, so for me, I was looking for a mentor who had done something that I hadn't done before so that I could open up blind spots that I'm just not familiar with and aware of. So he has his own business. He is miles and miles, millions and millions and millions of pounds ahead of me. And I was like, there's stuff I don't know. I haven't done that before. So let's chat. And he just gives feedback. And it's just been so useful to kind of get out your own way. But honestly, it did not occur to me. I was just like, head down, go to work, go home.
Yeah. But if it's not something that you're surrounded by, or you don't have a manager saying to you, I would suggest this, it's not necessarily going to pop up in your life otherwise. Penny, you just mentioned there, finding the right mentor or coach, depending on where you are in your career journey. You highlighted, when you start a new role or you get promoted. How do you work out what type of mentor you need, when, and how to find them then as well?
Look, I'm not the expert on it, but I would advise that, having clarity of what it is you actually want the mentor for. You'd be surprised how many people reach out and say, will you be my mentor? Like, what for? I just, okay, maybe not. So yeah, being really clear and the clarity of anything, if you're even writing it down, it becomes clearer, right? And then you'll know what you're looking for. And then it's either going to your manager and asking if they know people, your network. Pavilion, if you're part of it, they usually have a very good network of people anyway you can reach out to. And then it's good old prospecting, right? If you can't, someone will know someone, but if not, it will be going on to LinkedIn, a bit like prospecting for your ideal customer profile, right? And then write something compelling to that person to make them think about why you want it and stand out. I mean, when I've looked for mentors, I've really done my preparation before I've gone in front of them, right? I know who they are. I know why exactly I want them. I've got a list of things that I know. I've read about what they've done. I mean, Google and chat, you've got everything at your fingertips these days, right? And then I will approach them in a compelling way, which is, this is what I'm trying to do. This is what I'd like to achieve. This is why I think you'd be a good fit. Can we have a 10-minute call? Are you open to mentor? And you usually see if they're kind of that demographic anyway. And invariably, every single one of them will say yes, right? And then you'll have the conversation. So I think that's what I would advise for finding a mentor.
100% win rate.
Definitely. You know what, though? People want to usually, at a certain time in their career, want to give back. But they don't want to waste their time either, or yours. So there's always something in it both ways to a degree.
With your approach to be a mentor, what makes someone stand out and you think, yes, I'm happy to chat to you?
I mean, someone who is, I don't want to say respectful of your time, because that's not about respect necessarily. What I mean is come prepared. So if I, as a mentee, have always turned up on time, I'm prepared with the notes of what I want to cover that session. I'm very clear with the person on, we might have some actions, I'll summarize them if that person isn't. And then actually the next session, I always have a cadence that is set in. And then when I arrive the next time, I will have done the work and have feedback on what they said last time. And actually, I worked with a mentor, it was Imran actually, he was like, I love this. Because he said, I'm learning and I'm having fun sort of practicing out the things that I know with you in a new business. So that is what I would advise, is what good looks like. Well, I mean, goodish looks like. And that's what I'd want for mentees to a certain degree to come with me, because otherwise they're not going to get anything out of it, right? It's not just about me, it's about the two-way street, and you really want the person to be getting value.
Yeah. How do you work it with your mentor at the moment? How do you make sure that you're both getting value from it?
We're just both excited to talk all the time. He's like this master NLP practitioner. So like put me through he put me through it in the first session. I was like, oh, bloody hell. So I was lucky with that, to be fair. Mm-hmm. But so that just helped to iron out some things. So we just have a really he has a clear idea about what I'm trying to do and what I'm doing and where some of the gaps are. And for him, he's been giving back for a while. And also for him, he's launching a coaching app.
What's his name, do you mind asking?
Chris Cummins. So he's launching a coaching app. So he's like, maybe you can do some coaching, on the app. So there's like a little exchange there. So I'm giving him a bit of advice around tech, because he hasn't run a tech business before. He's just run like a training business. Whereas I can give him some hints and tips around, things he needs to think through with the strategy. So it's working. There's a bit of reverse mentoring in there as well, which is pretty good.
Do you mentor anyone yourself?
Me. So I get a lot of people, particularly over the last few years, ask for mentoring. But the first thing that I do is I'll see what they never ask good questions. It's so frustrating, because I'm like, I really want to help you, but you haven't done the basics yet. Like,
no, I agree.
I need a new job.
Than often.
I need a new job. What are you interested in? Sales. Okay.
I agree with you.
So pretty broad. Yeah. So so I always say, okay, so do these 3 things. And every single time they never do it and they never come back, because they just don't do the basics. Like, you're asking me questions. I've got so much content, like hundreds of hours. I'm like, here's 3 links, go check that out, and then come back. And they never do. Never, ever. It's just people don't always want to do the work. So when the only time that they do the work is when it ends up being like a paid coaching thing. Yeah. So then it's like, true. Now they're spending money. They're like, I will be there.
Yeah, then when they actually start paying.
Yeah. So that's different. They always turn up, of course.
On that point, I would say that normally paid for coaching and mentoring tends to be more effective, I've seen, just because both people tend to commit more.
Commitment.
That's just...
Yeah. What's your experience, Aly, with both being a mentor and a mentee?
I have been a part of, when I was at Funding Circle, they tried to put in like a structured mentoring program around the business where you signed up if you wanted a mentor and if you wanted to be somebody's mentor. And obviously that was a great initiative from the company. And then they placed people with obviously other senior people in a variety of different business areas. The positive of that was obviously getting somebody else's perspective from a completely different area, and the way they went about their way and their day, and their mindset was obviously completely different to what mine would have been in sales. So it was good to kind of have a difference of opinion outside of your direct managers. I didn't find it that useful when it was a really structured mentoring program, because I didn't get to choose that person for a specific reason, like you were saying, Penny, and actually figuring out what your gap was. So I didn't see that as being hugely valuable to me at that point. And I actually think that then you're going to get more out of it. You're going to be more bought in and more committed if you've proactively gone out to find your own mentor. You figured out what your gap is. You figured out what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, I don't agree with the formal mentoring program. I think a buddy scheme on a formal basis, perfect. But yeah, mentoring I think should be on you to figure out and to go after kind of what you're looking for.
As a manager, you can also support, because if one of your team says, I'm really looking for a mentor and I think this sort of person would be ideal, I think it's really nice if you can support them in helping find someone from your network as well. So, and as a mentor, how have you found that?
So I've typically had a similar approach as what I experienced myself with keeping in touch with like my old managers. So I've got really great relationships with people who I still work with at Sea Legals or who've just left, and then still people I worked with 3+ years ago at Funding Circle. A few of them followed me to Sea Legals. But it's nice to stay in touch with those people, and every now and then you'll get a random message. There's nothing on like a formal basis, but they reach out and say, oh, I've got this problem, or I'm just about to join this new role. Can you help me with this? And that works well more on like an ad hoc basis.
So lovely, because you're paying it forward. Your managers did it for you, and now you're doing it for your team, and they'll go and do it for their team.
So similar structure, but less formal.
Lovely. Just broadening out on the feedback and mentorship. How, Hannah, do you think it can help create these more diverse and inclusive environments?
I was thinking about this, and with the reverse mentoring piece that I was talking about earlier. So I think, like, let's be honest, a lot of leaders don't look like me, look like any of us, really. A lot of it, that's the thing. So people really senior up in the organization, often very similar to some degree, right? So I think what mentoring does is it opens them up to engaging with different people and actually seeing some of their superpowers. So I love when you see reverse mentoring in action, and you see a senior leader who's come down to the sales floor or something and spoken to the floor. So yes, but back to the floor and spoken to someone else who's like in a different department, different background. They're like, damn, who are you? Like, I like you. Like, and they're learning things. So I think what mentoring does is it allows different kinds of conversations, different kind of feedback, because you're getting a completely new perspective from someone. So I think it's so important, and I've seen it happen and work so well. And I love when senior leaders recognize the different privileges they have, and they say, I know that I can learn from someone that doesn't look like me, doesn't have the same background as me, and they're proactive in doing that. So I think that's how we start to show, like, to your point, when you're thinking about that career trajectory and you're like, it was a male champion or something, right? And a sponsor. They wouldn't have known that if they didn't come and engage with you, or someone didn't, shout for you and say, Penny's awesome, like, give her a chance, give her that opportunity. Because we know what happens with a lot of females as well. We don't punch above our weight. We have to be 130% before we think about doing something that
someone else needs to champion you.
Someone has to champion, like, go on, like, go and do it. You've kind of like smashed a target for 10 years, but they still won't put a hand up. So we need that kind of cross-pollination to kind of create that diversity at the top. And I think it's happening, but just not fast enough.
You were talking about skip level reviews can be really helpful for that as well.
I just say I love that. I just want to stay on Hannah's point, because I think it's so important, and that kind of ties into the whole skip level thing, right?
Yeah.
Again, seeing the more senior I've got, the more I've been the only woman in the room, and it's just still there now, and just it's not that and it creates an environment. There was an interesting, I'm going slightly off point here, but there was an interesting point we did in the book where we had some research, and we had 30 people around a table, and we did a focus group. And actually what happened was, and we've got contributors that are male and female, by the way, it's not all women at all, but it just so happened in this focus group that there were only 2 guys and the rest were women, because some had dropped out or whatever. And they were doing introductions. They went around the table, and the guy who is really senior, like a unicorn, he's quite well known, he's one of the contributors, got up and introduced himself. And the first thing he said was, when he got off, he went, I don't know why, I just feel really a bit nervous. He went, I feel a bit uncomfortable, and I'm trying to work out why, because I love public speaking. And he went, I think I've just realised I'm the only guy in the room practically. And he went, and I'm worried I'm going to say something wrong. And he went, I've had a lightning bulb moment, which is, oh, this must be what women feel when they're in the... He was like, So how old was he,
Penny, do you reckon,
No,
roughly?
that wasn't a disrespect on him.
Well,
He was right. Like, he was
years.
mid-30s, late 30s.
So like in 15 years of his career, he'd
but
never
that's
had
not a
that
disrespect
situation.
of him. That was more, he was like, he's got actually a diverse team. He's, doing all the things. He wants to be part of the book. It was more, he'd never experienced that. So it was more, he'd never felt that. And because why would he? Because usually there are more men in a room, and particularly in textiles, which has, unfortunately, less diversity than other industries. So, and even more so when you get to the C-suite. So I think having that idea where, to be honest, regardless of gender, really, managers at C-suite should be talking to people on any level down, because you're losing, the more you're senior, the more people filter stuff. And then you get filter, and then you actually just hear happy years and stories, right? And so you don't actually know what's going on. So regardless of diversity, you should be actually like out on the sales floor, speaking to people, etc., and with clients. But on the diversity front, I support in what Hannah said fully. I think that's really, really important.
The funny thing is that often when you bring in consultants and advisors, that's what they do. They just go and speak to people at all levels and come back with all of this amazing insight, which you could have done yourself, but you tend to be in your leadership gang in that echo chamber.
Unfortunately, is a large part white male. So, not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with it. I'm saying something wrong with the lack of diversity, but not white male, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How important has feedback and mentorship been in your career, do you think?
Well, when I was younger, as I say, I didn't used to particularly like feedback, but obviously if you don't know what you don't know. And so actually somebody calling out something that you're doing wrong, which you're completely not aware of, is invaluable to you. Otherwise, how do you expect to improve? So as I said before, like really seeing it as power, both positive and constructive. I think one thing that was really eye-opening for me was understanding, I suppose, how much the ratio of positive to constructive feedback that's needed to try and get the best out of people. And it's a lot of managers, again, myself included probably, can be more on the constructive side and quite critical because you know what your expectations are, you know where your bar is, and you're trying to push people to get there. And actually the way to get people to improve is to obviously celebrate the positives that they do and give them small bits of constructive feedback along the way.
What should the ratio be?
Minimum 5-1.
Really? I wonder what it is on average in the tech space.
Yeah.
Definitely nowhere near that.
Which is sometimes really hard to do. And actually then it's like, even though it's kind of your expectation of somebody in their day-to-day role, even just celebrating that they had a good day. They didn't do anything outstanding, but that's a good day. Like just appreciating that.
That's such a good point, because you think in sales teams, they often get beaten over the head with not hitting the target. And we always hear the negative, but not really celebrating
the small things, exactly.
Things, or even the wins,
Yeah. And for you, Penny, anything that came out in the book about how important this is in people's career journeys?
Celebrating success, or
just more generally the importance of feedback and mentorship?
Oh yes, mentorship was huge. Feedback was more around how to give it and how it can be damaging if it's not done correctly, particularly for women, because there were research showed that we're more critical, self-critical. I'm not saying that men aren't either, but women have a tendency to be self-critical. So if there's more negative feedback than is positive, that's going to actually bring down and be negative
your ratio
rather than positive. So that came out. So I would say balance, is important.
On that note of the negative feedback, we're going to go into a quick fire round. The worst feedback scenario you have ever been in, and I'm going to start here. And it was feedback given to me. I was very early days into my Go Cardless career. And one of my team said to me, working with you and the VP of sales is like having the worst divorced parents ever. I decided I need to go and sort that out pretty quickly. Yeah, that was very helpful, but not the nicest to hear. How about you?
I mean, if I gave the worst, I don't think you'd be able to put it on a podcast. So I probably just... Are you sure? So I received some feedback from someone that I was leading a group of consultants, and one of the feedback was, so Hannah is a Black woman trying to steal all the jobs from the white men, and
oh wow,
she is not very supportive of people in the team. And I was just like, what on? Like, can you imagine seeing that feedback? I had to take it seriously, of course, but really, that was really awkward and weird.
How did you handle that?
Well, he was managed out just
Wow.
on the cusp of that, just because he just wasn't performing very well. And like when you're doing consulting and you're working with like companies that are paying you 30 or 40 grand a month and you're not doing well, you just can't do that. It's a lot of money. So yeah, that was crazy. And the other one was, which was it was hard to hear, but to balance it, I'd say was, I got told that Hannah, you're doing all right, but you just don't come to leadership meetings. And I struggled with that only because there was a lot of pressure in the role. And it was like, I'm going to own the decision not to be there and talk about the ingredients when I want to just cook. I don't want to keep talking about it. I want to do the work. So I just owned it and just took the lashings. Yeah, took the lashings.
I love that analogy as well. That's great.
Well.
What about you, Penny?
Well, actually, it's funny because I was thinking, I'd kind of talked about the one with Facebook earlier, it was generic. And then you just triggered something with your really bad one on that one. I was like, one that I buried deep in the back of my head from years and years ago. And I was like, oh yeah, shall I tell that one? So I worked in financial services in the city in 1999, 2000, which was pretty male chauvinistic at the time. And the feedback I got was from only other woman, which is quite interesting, not from the guys. And we'd done an offsite and I was very excited. I was, 20 something. I got to fly to Vale, do the performers club, whatever. And it was really baking hot. And it was like a hoedown, what do they call them? Hoedown, like a, cowboy themed thing. And so I went and I was always worried worried about what I wore as a woman because I was one of the only women. So I had like a top but it was hot, a vest top and jeans, and then I had some boots. And we were doing like a dance thing. Anyway, we got back from the States, and this woman who tenured VP of sales said, I just need to talk to you, take you to a room. So I sat down, I was like, and she said, I just need to have some feedback for you. And I was like, oh no. I said, I want to talk about what you were wearing when you were in the States and the thing. And I thought, what? And she said, it wasn't really appropriate for work. And I've spoken to your boss and we've decided we'll give you some money to buy more appropriate clothes. This one. It was only £450, so there wasn't that much. But I was like, suit would be more than that. No, but anyway, yes, that's what I got. And I just sat there and went, yeah. So that was my feedback.
Wow. I feel like mine is nothing in comparison to these. Wow. Wow. No, I was just going to say, when I first started managing, obviously everyone tells you, make sure you give direct feedback. It's got to be timely. And I had a manager at the time who used to make notes in his notepad. And then like 4 weeks later, we'd go to a one-to-one and he'd get the notepad out and he'd say, on the 3rd of February at 11:10, you did blah, blah, blah. And I just found it's like obviously so frustrating because it was like lots of like small things that had accumulated. And actually, if you just addressed it at the time, yeah, so that was just not the way to do it.
Did you give him that feedback?
I actually didn't at the time. No,
I don't think he'd have welcomed it from the sounds of it.
I should have.
Ali, sticking with you, what's one thing that leaders should start or stop doing today?
I think everybody knows it, but just remembering to like praise in public and obviously criticize or give constructive feedback in private. And especially when you're managing sales teams, revenue teams, like typically the profile of those people is that they get motivated by shout outs and praise and recognition. But obviously the impact you can have if you give someone constructive feedback in a public setting can obviously be really detrimental to them. So making sure that you remember that motto, I suppose, and action it.
If they stop with that kind of feedback you talked about as a good example, generic feedback that isn't in context and fluffed around, I think start listening and looking at your team and who's in the room. I'm going slightly off of feedback, but it's more about playing on the inclusivity card, which is there may be some people who are quietly suffering or quiet in the room, or there'll be different dynamics. Just start opening your eyes and listening to what's happening and looking at your team. Sometimes I think managers are so deep in their numbers and what they need to do and their own world of performance, they're forgetting that there's people, not robots in their teams. And I think I'm guilty of doing it. We've all done it, but it's like you've got a number, you're being harangued for it, but we're all people, and actually people work for people. And I think the more you do that and in that level and lead from that, you'll get more from your team and you'll get the trust, you'll get the psychological safety, and you'll get the feedback loop going.
So similar vein to Penny, I'd say start being a master observer. Just pick things up, try and pick up the metadata in the team. I always use that term. It's just like things that aren't explicitly said or done. Just feel it out a bit more. And I'd say stop using your authority as something that gives you the right to have certain personal conversations with your team if you haven't earned the right. I think a lot of leaders are like, how is this and how? It's like, I don't like you that much yet, so I don't want to.
I'm prepared to share this. Yeah,
I'm actually not going to share that. They don't have to, but yeah, we think as authority figures that we have the right. So no.
I am stealing the team's metadata. That is a great expression.
One, isn't it?
Yeah, that's coming home with me.
You've got all
Would you
kinds of
charge?
phrases. Just listen to our podcast.
On that note, last question, and then we'll have some time for questions for you all. One podcast book that you would recommend? It can be your own.
I would say, please listen. It's actually
your
very, very, very specially called the B2B Go-to-Market podcast. I don't know how no one took my name. No one had it. I was like, Zach, make something up. He was like, the B2B Go. I was like, there we go. So yeah, I mean, that would be great. I would say though, also try and listen to things that aren't related to sales, please. Like, oh God, like sales is just like kind of a regurgitation of a lot of stuff. So try and get out of there. Listen to a lot of the like A116 things around AI and just what it takes to actually build it and how it can, where we're going with that. Look at things like psychology, look at the Founders podcast is a new favorite of mine as well. Absolutely love that. It's just founder stories, really interesting. And I'd say from a book wise, I was actually going to bring one, but I couldn't fit in my bag, but it's the Outward Mindset by the Arbinger Institute. It's one of those books that you read. I think I read it on the journey to New York. It was like 8 hours, whatever. And I cried. Because it's one of those things where you read it and you're like, now I can see why I had that issue in my relationship. I can see why I had that issue with that manager. It really is about taking a mindset where you understand how people's emotions are made, their baggage, and gives you a framework for how you can have better conversations and grow your teams and businesses. Honestly, one of the best books I've read.
Brilliant.
Yeah,
It's
so good.
I'm like,
So enthusiastic.
I think
It's
there's,
really good.
there's something coming out next week that might be the best book to read.
Yeah.
well, I haven't got a book. I would have a shameless plug. The female sales leader. So Medic Andy White came to me, who's the CEO of Medic. I was very lucky a couple of years ago, and said he does a lot of training in environments, but why is it he sees these women's outperforming a lot of their male counterparts, or just always overperforming, and there's not enough when they go to leadership. What's happening? So he said, I'd like to create a book that's written by women. He said, I'm not going to write it. That will help encourage more women to come into tech sales, will help with practical stories and tips. There's 30 contributors into how to progress and have a successful career in sales, and then really look to the male counterparts of what you can do to help and create inclusive environments, and also organizations to help women should they want to progress into the C-suite within sales. So it's called The Female Sales Leader, and it's out next week. So that's
Shameless plug. Nice.
So, and actually, other than that, I was thinking here, Radical Candid, which everyone's listened to, and that's fine. I actually agree with Hannah, though, and there's a qualified sales leader that kind of everyone has to read, right? Jack Momenham. I actually do tend to listen to things outside of sales now, because I always feel like it's always the same stuff I'm listening to. So that kind of thing. So I actually tend to listen to podcasts outside of it. Actually, I listen to some mental health well-being ones. Actually, Dr. Chatterjee's great. I actually listen to his podcast quite a lot. I think that I learn things about my own self and my own health and well-being.
I also had Radical Candor, which given the topic of the session today, just because obviously in terms of that book, really understanding what your role is, I suppose, as a manager, you actually have to really care about the people that you manage and that you're responsible for. So then therefore the feedback that you give is obviously relevant, and they know that you've got the best interests at heart as well. So would wholeheartedly recommend that, even though it's a bit cliche.
So, any questions from our audience, or any great or horrific feedback that you would like to share as well?
I've got a question. I know obviously we're saying a lot about diversity, but I mean, I work in marketing, but I'm thinking if you're a female salesperson, do you think it's important to have a mentor that is also female?
Great question. So is it important to have a mentor that is also female? Penny, you touched on this earlier.
I think it's good to have both. I wouldn't advise just having a female mentor. Again, it comes down to, I think, a blend. Diversity in your mentorship is important. So, and again, it comes back to what you want. I think it's good to have one if you can, but I've had a mix personally.
Clear on your goals, as you mentioned, you know what you're trying to do. You just want to find someone who can lead you on that path. I don't care if it's a frog, to be honest. Just like, I really don't care.
That's so important. It's about, is it the right person versus are they the right gender?
Yeah, like, I don't even want to necessarily be mates with you. I just like, if I respect you and you've done something I haven't done, it's like, we can keep that dynamic. We don't have to be besties, and that's entirely fine.
I just really think I've never had a female manager in my career, actually. So all of my mentors or informal advisors have always been males. So I would say no, it doesn't have to be same gender, but yeah, I should try and find one.
Yeah. Just if I may expand on that point, because I think it's an important point what you've just said, actually, which was going to lead me to the next piece, which is you've got a mentor, and that can be male or female, it doesn't matter. But I think when you think about women aspiring in their own professions, it's important to have women at the top to look for that you can aspire to. So I think they're different things, but they come to the same path in a way. So I think that's why it's really important to have a diverse, not just gender, but diverse C-suite, so that other people feel they can see more of them and can aspire to move that way. And it will naturally, I think, then happen. But yeah.
That's important. You can have a number of different mentors. You don't need to just have one, and they all play different roles in your advisory board. Any other questions?
Hi. I think quite often middle management end up being a bit of like the last line of defense on mentoring. So I think for me personally, like, I know there are people that I think would be amazing to be mentored by someone in our exec team, but I just can't see a world where that time is going to be made for them. And I find myself being a bit of like a blocker almost, because I'll probably spread myself too thin across people to try and help them in that way. So I think probably my question long way around is like, how do you try and maybe advocate in your business for more of that further up? Because, that's the bit, I can sing that all day long and say it's amazing. But if it's not getting any further up the chain, like, how do I make that happen?
So how can you get the C-suite more involved in mentoring, but also advocating for it as well, and highlighting the benefits for them in their careers?
I would say it's important to kind of practice what you preach. So like I didn't invest anywhere near enough time earlier on, but for the past like year or so, I've really made a conscious effort to like build time into my week to expand my network. And so when then other team members can see someone at a more senior level investing their own time into those important activities, that will help with the messaging that you do need to craft time out in your day. And then also encouraging, whether it's Friday afternoons or however you want to structure it, like almost having like a block time, which is like, this is your development time, this is your mentoring time, or however you want to structure it. So having more of a framework, but ultimately they've got to see the importance in it themselves. Otherwise you can do as much as you want and it won't work.
One thing we did at my tutor was, it wasn't mentorship, but we just, as the C-suite, spent an hour with somebody that was at a more junior level in a different department every month. And I found it so valuable because I learned so much about their area of the business. And I'd always ask, like, what do you think we could be doing better? So it was actually, I wouldn't even say it was mentorship. I think, well, maybe I was being mentored by them, but that was really valuable. And that was something that we all committed to do once a month.
Also, people are more likely to turn up for that because it's less scary.
Exactly. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. We're just going to do one more question to finish off. And you had one at the back.
Thank you so much for the panel discussion. Really, really helpful. Yeah. What would you advise to someone who's recently changed careers and roles in terms of looking for a mentor if they don't have that network that they can leverage because they come from a different space? So what would you say they can do? Where would you advise them to go for like mentorship?
New career, new role. How do you find a great mentor?
Sales navigator, baby.
I do
everything on Sales Navigator. I'm like, need this, need that. So, but honestly, go to Sales Navigator, find the people who you are close to and see who they're connected to. So you can literally be like connections of Hannah Ajikawo and just be like, okay, I've met Hannah at the panel. Who did she know? Probably connected to someone that actually could be quite useful to you. So stuff like that. And just be, as Penny was saying, be really clear on just like what you're trying to do. And if you're unclear, also say that. Like, I'm actually just looking for some direction to get clarity on what I'm trying to think through, because there will be people that are like, to be fair, I've got time, like, let me help you out. But yeah, if you just treat it like prospecting, literally, and for me, that's the quickest way, because then you can tune it to what's going to be suitable for you. Sometimes someone might refer a mentor and you're like, I really don't like this person, but now that my friend told me to speak to them, I have no choice. Whereas if you are a bit more curated in that, you might be able to get more.
And I can guarantee whoever you send your outbound to will be delighted, because, you know, the odd occasion I get, and I'm like, oh my goodness, someone wants to talk to me. It's like a huge compliment. Anything you guys want to add?
I think Hannah's right. I think the clarity piece is important. And also, I love the fact you added that if you're not clear, you can ask for that. I think there are communities, right? There are lots of communities. And the thing is, we were talking about this earlier, it's actually quite a small world. I'm convinced I've seen your name somewhere before as well. I was like, Read, I know that name. So I think it's that once you've been around a while, and with Pavilion and Sales Confidence and God knows what else there is, there's all these Wiser Elite, like there's all these different communities. And before you know it, you're like, oh, actually, I've just seen lots of faces in the room again. So I think once you do what Hannah says, which you connect to different people, even just us on the panel and anyone else in this room, you'll start creating a spider web. And then think about what you want and then reach out and do your thing.
Just to add, like, people are really you'll be so surprised. I cold DM'd Goddard, the CEO of G2. I sent him like 20 words and he was like, sure, let's meet. I like what you're talking about. And then that started my partnership with G2. Literally.
Wow. Was that one of those emails you're like, oh my goodness.
It was like, I should have made a post about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'd just be surprised at who responds to your message.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Hannah, Penny and Aly. It's been such a delight to talk to you, and some amazing insights for everyone. So big thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Scale Sessions. If you found today's insights valuable, be sure to subscribe and leave a review.
Stay connected for more no-nonsense advice to help you scale your business, drive revenue, and achieve your growth goals.